Hello, David Bernard here, state and local public financing, or financing state and local government as it's officially called, at the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration. Uh, I'm back, you're back, I hope you're back, and I hope you and your loved ones are all well, most importantly. We will get through this hopefully sooner than later. Um, I hate this. I hate so many aspects of it, as most of you do. So, I'm complaining about, I have to teach online and I can't teach in the classroom where I prefer. Seems like a pretty petty thing to be worried about. So I'm trying to overcome that with your help. By the way, so some of you have emailed me questions and comments about class last week. I appreciate that. Not a requirement. You don't have to, but I do like hearing from you. One administrative thing: if you're not graduating, registration is going to be open soon, or maybe open now. I would encourage you to take my administrative law class, which I think is on Wednesdays in the fall, or my federalism class, which is on Thursdays. Anyway, love to see you in class again, and that might be an opportunity to do it if you're not graduating. We'll talk more about all of that kind of stuff later. Today's topic and next week's topic is the property tax. I love the property tax. I always want to lead off with it in the semester, but I can never really figure out how to do that. I'm a huge property tax fan. I think the property taxes, and I'm not alone on this, by the way, people far smarter than me have been singing the praises of the property tax for hundreds of years. The property tax is, and I believe this wholeheartedly, the ideal way, the perfect way of funding local government services. It's it's not a very good. Not very good for anything else for state or federal purposes, but it's very good for local government. I'm sorry, I was distracted for saying I'm making this video on my daughter's computer because she has the best computer for doing this, and she's getting like little dings and notices and stuff, and it's driving me crazy. I apologize. Anyway, back to the property tax. We're going to talk about the next 2 weeks real property taxation. There's also personal property taxation, which is a big field, not as big as the real property tax, but it's important. Where many states and local governments tax cars, value of cars and boats and motorcycles and things like that, or machinery, or inventory on the business side, which is awful tax policy, by the way. We're not going to talk about that, even though it's interesting and it's dumb. Taxing personal property is dumb. Taxing real property is smart. So the property tax is essentially, I'm going to tell you all the reasons why I love the tax in a minute, but it's basically a tax on wealth, right? Measured by real estate. It's an ad valorem tax. It is all about valuation, right? Your tax bill is all about what your property is valued at. There are few legal or constitutional issues or anything like that surrounding the property tax, right? So it's really a political issue, and you'll find out why that is. The property tax accounts is the primary source of revenue for local governments and school districts in the United States. It still accounts for about 75%, maybe a little bit higher, of local government owned source revenue, 80% of local government owned source revenue, and about 97% of independent school district owned source revenue, right? So it's very significant. It raises about $800 billion a year. It's very significant. The way it works, and it's actually, most people are surprised at how complicated it is, but the jurisdiction right? If you take a little town or a county or whatever the jurisdiction is, calculates the value of the real property in the city, and then they take an assessment value, which is based on a statewide equalization formula. I'll explain that. It's actually in the book. But what it means is, like, Illinois has a 40% assessment value, right? So you take the real market value of all the property, and then your assessed value is 40% of that in Illinois. The governing body, city council, county council, then sets the rate it needs to collect the amount of money for the budget, less intergovernmental aid and non-property tax revenue. And then the rate is always set in millage terms, which confuses people more, with 1 mil being 1/10 of 1% or 1,000th of value. Yes, super complicated. You can look this up on Wikipedia, by the way. That's where I get all of my information. Then the assessor's office assigns a value to each individual parcel in the jurisdiction based on some measure of market value. Determining the market value is no small task unless the property's been sold recently. So it's all about valuation, right? So what we want to do is from a practical, what you would care about if you were a homeowner, what I would care about if I was a homeowner, or I would care about if I was the government, is about valuation and what your property is worth. There's basically three approaches. There's a market value approach where you use comparable sales, right? So this works well. This works pretty well, very well, and for residential property, works very well in suburbia, right, where you'll have tracts of houses, and you can say, well, here's what the comparable sales are. And you can make adjustments and things like that. It's not exact, pretty good though. You can use the income approach, and this is what we do for commercial property. And you measure the property value according to the potential earnings. And you do this a lot with rental property, right? So an apartment building is valued this way. And you say, well, how much money are you going to make by renting out the apartments? And you try to figure out how much that is, and then you take a net income and capitalize it at a rate of return prevalent in the market, and you can come up with the value. And it's surprisingly accurate. And then lastly, and this, I'm not going to talk about this much because it doesn't happen very much, there's something called the cost approach. And if you don't have an income approach or a market approach, you don't have comparable sales, you figure out what the cost is of reconstructing the property or improvements to the property. You basically come up with a replacement cost, and then you depreciate it for obsolescence. Okay. So another thing you should know about the property tax, and I wish maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more next week, is virtually all jurisdictions exempt nonprofits, hospitals, schools, religious institutions, other government property from tax. So one of the principles of sound tax policy is you want to have a broad base, tax everything at a low rate. Washington, D.C. exempts a boatload of property from property tax, right? So if you just took the value of GW and Georgetown and AU and Howard, those are the major universities, and you took those universities, the value of the property they own is in the billions and billions of dollars, and it's not on the tax rolls. And what that means, it means that everybody else is paying higher taxes. So if you're a homeowner in D.C., you're paying higher taxes because GW and Georgetown and Howard and AU are not, and Catholic, Trinity, Gallaudet. Anyway, ridiculous. And they're using services. So not only are they not paying tax, they're using government services. Ridiculous, in my opinion. The school, you can't say that publicly. It's the one thing that gets them all together. There's also a lot of exemptions for development and economic development incentives, and we've talked about this before, and those are awful, obviously, as well, in my opinion. Uh, they don't work very well. Uh, so this is a tax on wealth, theoretically, and we know that not everyone is wealthy, not all homeowners are wealthy, and we're going to talk about this more next week, but almost all jurisdictions offer homestead exemptions, which provide some relief for all homeowners. Almost a bunch of states, and we'll talk about this again in more detail next week, offer relief for the elderly and for the working poor. We'll talk about that next week. Advantages of the tax. Why a tax is a good tax. It's a very good tax. One, it's an old tax. There's an old shibboleth. I think that's Yiddish. That an old tax is a good tax. Well, this tax has been around since the beginning of time. So we're used to it, right? So it's not like this is like some kind of shocking thing. If you're a homeowner, you pay the tax, and it's like no big deal. Shut up. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. But the truth is, if you tax something over time, it becomes ingrained in your psyche, and so it's not a shocking thing. More importantly, from a government perspective, the old tax thing means it should be more politically acceptable. It's not really, but more importantly, from a government perspective, is it's a stable tax. It is proven to be one of the most stable and reliable sources of revenue especially for local governments in the history of the country. And we know from this class that stability and reliability are hallmarks of good tax systems. And the reason why it is a stable source of revenue is the real reason why it's a stable source of revenue is that property values don't fluctuate as fast as the rest of the economy, right? And our assessment system lags behind the rest of the economy, right? So we're going to assess property next year, and so maybe property's taking a little down hit because of COVID-19. We're not going to see that until next year, and then perhaps things will be on the upswing again. So there's always a lag. But property values, with some exceptions, don't fluctuate and are not as volatile. And there's been exceptions to that, right? So during the financial crisis in 2009-10, some places in Arizona and Florida, and there were pockets of real estate that got hammered more than others, but in general, remember, small planet, lots of people, right? So small planet, lots of people. So we're not creating more Earth. So values are going to go up, which leads me to the other advantage is over time, if you plotted this out, if you had a plot, and you plotted it out, it would be like this. Property values would be going up, kind of squiggly lines. If you plotted it to the beginning of time, they'd be going up. So every year, property values go up, or every set of years they go up. And you get more money. And it's stable. And you have to pay police officers and teachers every year, and this is a good way to do it. Okay. The other good thing about the tax that I love is it's an easy to administer tax. We know the property is. You can't hide it. If you don't pay your property tax, we are going to put a lien on your property, and you will not be able to sell it until you do. And if you still continue, we'll sell it for you and take our cut, the government. So you can hide income, you can hide sales, you can hide corporate income, you can play all kinds of games. You can't do that with the property tax. Fundamentally solid, good thing, right? The other thing about the property tax, easy to administer, and it's also easy to comply with, right? So you get a bill, right, every year, and you pay your tax. So there's not a lot of figuring, right? You don't have to hire H&R Block to do it. The other thing, from a compliance perspective is if you own property, you probably have a mortgage. Almost all property taxes in this country are escrowed into mortgage payments. So you're not even writing that check at the end of the year. You're paying it as part of your mortgage throughout the year. So every month you pay your mortgage. Those of you who are homeowners right now will know that. And there you go. What else is good about the tax? 15 minutes. Oh, okay. So it's a little bit in the weeds. But in suburbia, where I live, I'm hunkered down in suburbia right now. In suburbia, the property tax acts as a benefits tax. How is that, Professor? You're wondering? Well, I'll tell you why. So this is not my idea, by the way. This is Professor William Fischel's idea from Dartmouth University. Very smart guy. He first came up with this idea, and here's the idea, and I think this works. Is the property tax is capitalizing the value of your property in your house. And that's a negative capitalization, right? So if your house is worth under $1,000, you're going to pay $1,000 in tax on it every year. It's not really worth $100,000. It's worth something less. However, the public services you buy with the public services that we buy with the property tax are also capitalized in the value of your house. Theoretically, if the government's doing its job, they'll even out. It'll be a positive capitalization of $1,000, and that's a user fee, right? You're paying it for the services you're getting, and you're maintaining the same value of your house. This works. It doesn't work so well in agricultural areas or in big cities for reasons that I'm not going to get into right now. But it works in suburbia, and that's 60% of the property tax, or more, 70% of the property tax. Not perfect, but it sort of makes sense. And when you think about it from the capitalization standpoint, if you think about places like Fairfax County, where I'm in right now, I pay a lot of property taxes. We have a very high property tax rate here in Northern Virginia. But you know what I get with it for that high property tax? Some of the best public schools in the country. And people want to buy my house because the schools are so good. So that whole benefits tax thing, I'm a believer. You can read about it a little bit more in the book. It's in the book if you bought the book. A little more theoretically, also something that I'm a big believer in is the tax allows local control. So I'm a localism guy. I think localism is a normative good. I think local governments are efficient, effective, democratically responsible, and generally very good. So then why? Well, it is the only viable, in order to have political control, you need fiscal control. In order to have political autonomy, you need fiscal autonomy. Otherwise, it doesn't work, right? If you don't have control over your finances, you have no power. So local governments need control over their finances. So you say, okay, well, then why is this the only thing? Well, the sales tax is not a viable alternative. The local option sales tax, local option income tax is not viable alternatives, even less so. Business, certainly not business taxes. We've slapped user fees on everything that moves already. So the property tax is the only tax. The other related good thing to it along those lines is the federal government's not involved, right? So there's no federal or state really property tax. So the local governments are alone out there. And then finally, this is my finally, the tax, some good thing about tax is it's visible, right? You can see how much you pay every year, and that's also a hallmark of good, sound tax policy. All right, next week we're going to talk about the disadvantages of the tax for a minute, and what some of the consequences of those disadvantages are, and some of the policy consequences. You stay safe, be happy, be well. Watch Tiger King.